Mention the phrase UFO crash, and Roswell, New Mexico immediately comes to mind. It is the most famous UFO incident of all time and marks the year 1947 as the beginning of the modern UFO era. But few people realize it wasn't America's first UFO-related incident. 2 weeks before Roswell, another UFO incident took place over Puget Sound in Washington state. But there are two key differences between this crash in Washington and Roswell. 2 people were killed, and there is still physical evidence left behind.
I welcome this kind of examination.
We came,
and for the international order that we have worked for generations to build.
A new world order. New world order.
we saw.
If suddenly there was a threat to this world from some other species, from another planet, outside in the universe.
Always talk to you like they're the boss. And then we're going to Washington, D.C. to take back the White House!
He died.
Ah!
He died.
But that's a wicked woman.
Because people have got to know whether or not their president's a crook. Well, I'm not a crook.
You can keep it. Period. 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 They are the focus of evil in the modern world. It's a catastrophe.
Deep in my heart, I do believe we shall overcome.
This is the Midnight Rider News Podcast. Hello, America and the world. Welcome to the Midnight Rider News Show. I'm St. Patrick, your friendly neighborhood host, traipsing through the trials and travails that have so tempestuously and untruthfully been blasted into your eyes, ears, and minds by the state-sponsored talking heads, court historians, and textbook conglomerates that control information today. Tonight, we have episode 034, Kenn Thomas, Maury Island, and the JFK assassination. Now, Kenn will join us next in the midnight hour, so let's clean the castle if we may. Facebook, we are at Midnight Rider News Show. That's at Midnight Rider News Show. Once again, it is not at Midnight Rider News. It is at Midnight Rider News Show. So please share us. And our Twitter, MWN _St. Patrick. We are LinkedIn at St. Patrick. Our email is midnightridernews@gmail.com. The free archives of the Midnight Rider News Show are available at midnightridernews.com. You can also find them on iTunes, Stitcher Radio, and a heapin' helpin' of your favorite podcast providers. Now, this is our final show of our first annual JFK month, and we would like to send a sincere thank you to the guests that have appeared in this month. That would include Joseph Green, St. John Hunt, Robert Groden, William Matson Law, Gary Fannin, Ralph Epperson, and tonight's guest, Kenn Thomas. A special thank you goes out to those listening in the United States and around the world also. Our top 10 international markets this year in this order are the United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, Sweden, the Netherlands, New Zealand, Taiwan, Peru, Germany, and Spain. We continue to be downloaded in 72 countries, so that makes us both very happy and very humbled. So thank you all so much. For those of you who are wondering what our top 10 U.S. markets are for 2017, I'm going to list them at the end of the year, so stay tuned. We'll be right back with Kenn Thomas. September 11, 2001 is the day Americans will never forget. But what really happened in Manhattan, in Washington, D.C., and in the skies over Shanksville, Pennsylvania? Christopher Boleyn joined us in episode 018 to talk about it all.
This is Christopher Boleyn, author of Solving 9/11 and The War on Terror, the plot to rule the Middle East. If you want to know the truth behind 9/11 and the War on Terror, listen to episode 18 of the Midnight Rider News Show.
Kenn Thomas is important to the world of conspiracy as well as to your friendly neighborhood host. He's from the Midwest, which I admire, and he was the editor and publisher of the phenomenal Steam Shovel Press. He's the author of many works that simply push the walls of conspiracy in all different directions. If you like your conspiracies to fit into one easily identified little box, tonight is not for you. He understands that many of these stories link to one another, and you'll hear all about that tonight. So just to list a few of his works for you, he's the author or co-author of JFK and UFO, Military-Industrial Conspiracy, and the Cover-Up from Maury Island to Dallas, Mind Control, Oswald and JFK, NASA, Nazis and JFK, The Octopus, The Secret Government and the Death of Danny Casolaro, Parapolitics, Conspiracy in Contemporary America, and his newest book, Trumppocalypse Now, The Triumph of the Conspiracy Spectacle. I'm pleased to tell you tonight that Ken and I have agreed to do a bit of an intro to these ideas and the stories, but in 2018 we're going to take them book by book and bring you entire episodes on most of these incredible topics. So that said, joining us tonight from an undisclosed location amidst the hallowed hills and haunted mounds of Big Ten country, this is Kenn Thomas. Ken, how are you this evening?
Hey, I'm doing fine.
And thank you so much for being on the show tonight.
Well, thank you very much for your interest and attention. I really appreciate that.
Well, I have to start by telling you that I absolutely love the word parapolitics. Now, I'm not a big fan of the phrase conspiracy theory because of its origins and because of the negative connotations that have really been attached to it over the years, but I love parapolitics. Where did you come up with that?
I didn't come up with it at all, actually. It was originally coined by Peter Dale Scott, who you might have had on your show already, for all I know. He's a famous JFK researcher. He actually abandoned it for the term deep politics. But I thought parapolitics, that prefix para, it goes before parallel, it's the kind of politics that runs alongside. That's what para means, to run alongside. So it runs alongside normal politics. It just seems a perfect phrase to me. So I've tried to keep it in currency any way I can. But originally, you got to keep your hat to Peter Dale Scott for that one.
Oh, fantastic! Now, do you like the word conspiracy? Because you were kind of known as a conspiracy guy. So when you hear yourself called a conspiracy theorist, do you sort of say, "Yeah, that's me," or do you sort of back off on that a little bit? Does it make you cringe?
Actually, I have no problem with the word conspiracy at all. In fact, the motto of my magazine, Steam Shovel Press, was all conspiracy, no theory. It's the word theory that I have a problem with. Not that these aren't theories, but it's just that everything that passes for a mainstream view is also just a theory.
You are correct.
So if it's all theory, then there's no reason to even say the word theory anymore. But a conspiracy is a conspiracy, and just talk about it directly as that. I don't really understand why it falls into disrepute, because it's a very common phenomenon, even in mainstream media, they're all talking about conspiracies are, being pursued in the courts and that kind of thing. So, it's a perfectly fine word. It's the theory part.
Now, I'm going to ask you the origin question that I ask everyone else, because I think it's fascinating to find out when people sort of woke up to this idea that history is not what it seems. So do you remember the first time that you really thought, hey, something is wrong here, things are not what they seem?
Yeah, sure. I owe it all to Dustin Hoffman.
Oh, really?
Dustin Hoffman's finest movie was the biopic that he did of Lenny Bruce. And I went to see that when it came out. And I was totally fascinated by Lenny Bruce. Actually, Dustin Hoffman led me to Lenny Bruce. And I read Lenny Bruce, after seeing the Lenny movie with Dustin Hoffman, I went and got the book that it was based on, which is How to Talk Dirty and Influence People. Supposedly the autobiography of Lenny Bruce, but it was actually ghosted by Paul Krassner. And Paul Krassner, for many years, published an underground newspaper called The Realist, in which he, produced a lot of conspiracy writing. He was, in fact, a big fan and follower of Mae Brussell. So, so my origins, my lineage goes from basically Dustin Hoffman pointing me to Lenny Bruce pointing me to Krassner putting me right into the lap of Mae Brussell, who was, the great mother of all of us conspiracy theorists. And, and that just kind of dragged me into that whole world. I don't even think I was 20 years old at that point. I think I was still a teenager when all that was happening.
It's interesting that you mentioned Mae Brussell. I'm currently going through her archives, and they still sound amazing. They're still valuable as research. Why do you think she sort of gained the level of popularity that she did?
Mae Brussell is still kind of a specialized taste. She's not a household name by any stretch of the imagination. I don't know.
Well, what I was really referring to was her popularity within our world, within the alternative history / conspiracy world.
Oh, in our world, she's the queen of us all. She's the goddess of the conspiracy world. But in the wider world, she doesn't get the credit she deserves. Yeah, and of course, the conspiracy world has gone through generations, since her. Her legacy fell into the hands of John Judge for the most part, and then Judge, Judge spent his life doing another. He had another extraordinary career, building on and expanding on everything that May did. Yeah, I should say, I should mention too is that when you get into it like that, you like own it. You're probably one of the few people in your whole social situation that is into it, and that's what happened with me. It was a while before I decided to create a magazine based on this knowledge, and basically I did that because at the time it seemed like it was so specialized and such a rare thing for people to be getting into that it seems to be falling apart. Actually, very similar to the situation today. May died in like 1988, right? And there was another. The way I met John Judge was through a magazine called Prevailing Winds. It was a conspiracy magazine that fell apart. And then there was another famous conspiracy magazine, Critique, which was published by a guy named Bob Banner, who joined a cult and changed the name of the magazine to Sacred Fire and totally abandoned the whole conspiracy thing. All those things were happening at once in the late 80s, early 90s. And it seemed to me that the whole interest, the whole subcult interest in conspiracies was going to die if I didn't do something about it. So I actually my magazine. The first few issues of my magazine were for things that as a writer, and when you write a lot of stuff, you don't get all of it accepted. The stuff that wasn't accepted was going to go into the magazine. But then in the third issue, after May's death, I published a call for papers and called in and tried to get everybody to write things based on conspiracy themes. So it was that fourth issue that Steam Shovel Press actually became a conspiracy magazine.
Well, that leads us into the 1980s, and you contributed to an anthology on Bill Cooper, the man who wrote Behold a Pale Horse. What do you remember about seeing or reading Behold a Pale Horse for the first time?
I thought it was fascinating, actually. I struck up a friendship with Bill Cooper, actually. And you know who was one of his biggest fans? This is an interesting conspiracy fact.
Who was that?
The late, great Dick Gregory, who just passed away. Another friend of mine, a brilliant man himself, but, considering everything that he was into and considering the kinds of people both of them were, it was really amazing to me that, I've seen him carrying around a copy of Behold a Pale Horse.
You know what, Ken? I can't say I'm wholly surprised by that. Now, I don't mean this in a negative way at all, but I think Behold a Pale Horse is still to this day more popular than it should probably be. And I say that because I think there are a few egregious errors of fact contained within. However, it is still the only book I've ever read that made me sort of feel like I was reading something underground, something I really wasn't supposed to read. And it's like someone gave you a secret file and said, for your eyes only. And isn't that what it was meant to do?
That is absolutely true. Bill Cooper captures the mood, doesn't he? Right? More than meeting up with the facts as you might know them. But he does present the feeling. A certain kind of paranoia, I guess, but also a civilized paranoia, a paranoia that's trying to dig into deeper facts. I mean, a lot of them were straight wrong. A lot of Cooper stuff was based on the driver did it theory of the Kennedy assassination.
Yes, William Greer.
Yeah. In fact, there's the guy that surfaced that whole story about the driver did it theory was actually a guy named Lars Hansen. He did an affidavit. I think you can still find it online somewhere, called "Who's Fooling Whom," and he talks about how that the driver did it version of the film passes through various hands and winds up being. Actually, there was a long series of tapes where apparently the driver did it film was taken out of Cooper's hands, and he was calling. He might have been calling. Hansen, but all night, kept calling him back, and as getting more progressively drunk as he keeps calling this guy back and threatening him about the film. So that was Bill Cooper all over. I mean, he was a drinker as well, but also he was one of the first of those kind of populist, angry populist white guys. You know, the kind that Alex Jones has commercialized so successfully. But he was, but Cooper was all the way there. And like I said, I've had email exchanges with him. We had one argument about John Lennon that went on for a while. But he was really there. He was the real deal. And, he martyred himself for it too. He got killed, by the police, for the whole thing. So, I get the sense that a lot of that now, that became so common that it was all a shtick, angry white guy shtick. Jones is a perfect example. Actually, Jones in his early career, you can see Jones actually in two cartoon movies. One of them is called It's a Waking Life, and there was another one that was based on a Philip K. Dick novel. Name escapes me. But in A Waking Life, you actually see early Alex Jones, where he was another guy. I think he got into a Volkswagen with a loudspeaker, and he just drove down the streets of Austin, ranting crazy rants because he was outraged at the way the world was. And it seems really authentic, If you want to see Alex Jones, maybe at his earliest, at his best, really, you got to see this cartoon movie called Waking Life.
Well, this talk of William Cooper is actually going to bring us into the JFK story. Now, this may surprise some, but we're actually going to start the JFK story pre-Roswell, 1947, off of Tacoma, Washington. So, who are Harold Dahl and Fred Chrisman?
Harold Dahl. Well, there's actually, there are real police records of the three tramps that were arrested in the rail yard during the Kennedy assassination, right?
Right.
Yeah, and one of them is named Harold Doyle. And if you say Doyle with a Texas accent, it comes out something like Harold Dahl. Dahl being the person, the first, maybe the only witness of the Maury Island incident, which I've written a book about. This is a UFO incident that happened in 1947 up in Puget Sound, near Maury Island, near Puget Sound. And Harold Dahl's partner, Fred Chrisman, is the guy that Jim Garrison identified as the Grassy Knoll shooter. So, I don't like to proceed too quickly on these facts because people who don't know them, it needs to sink in a little bit about how important these connections are. But that's Harold Dahl. Harold Dahl, actually the boat the Maury Island UFO story is this. These guys are going out before Kenneth Arnold, before the beginning of the modern UFO era. These guys worked as log retrievers. Logs break free from their shipping lanes, and you get like $25 a log if you recover them. So Dahl had this boat in which he was doing this when all of a sudden these UFO come out of the sky and they circle above it. One of them starts to wobble. They spray stuff down on the boat. They call it slag. It's described variously as rocks and metal. And then another one of the UFOs taps the wobbling one, and then they all fly off. But the slag that they dropped off actually killed a dog off the boat and hit and wounded the arm of Charles Dahl, Harold's son. So that's the first of the modern UFO events. I say modern UFO because UFO have been seen throughout history. You find them in Renaissance paintings and things like that. But the first post-war incident was that one, and it came many days before, or several days before, Kenneth Arnold saw the wing-shaped craft that he saw flying around Mount Rainier.
Why do we not know the Maury Island incident the same as we do the later Roswell story?
Might be because of the JFK cover-up. I don't know. But, some people believe that it's the same craft. That the wobbling UFO at Maury Island continued on, got an instant repair from one of its buddies, continued on, but then eventually crashed in Roswell. If you're looking for a unified UFO theory there. That's one of them. Yeah. So, but it's to this day, it's amazing to me that it took me to come along in the 90s to write a book about this. It's the most fascinating aspect of a Kennedy assassination to me. But you're right. It's not even a footnote. Even today, people don't make the connection. You find a lot of people doing work, even making movies about the Maury Island incident, and not a word about this connection to the JFK business.
Well, I'm going to ask you to take us on that path from Maury Island in 1947 to Dallas in 1963, especially as traveled by Dahl and Chrisman. That path not only goes to Dallas, though. If I'm correct, it also weaves through New Orleans.
Well, yes, in a roundabout way. You know, this is 90 degrees of separation from the Kennedy assassination. Okay, let's walk down this pathway. Let me just go through the rest of the Maury Island story in broad strokes, and apologize to your listeners that I can't give you the detail that you're going to get if you get the book, which, by the way, is called JFK and UFO, and in the grand tradition of long subtitles, its subtitle is From Maury Island to Dallas, Military-Industrial Complex, Military-Industrial Conspiracy from Maury Island to Dallas. That's the subtitle, but JFK and UFO. And in addition to what we were just talking about, that UFO incident in Puget Sound, when Harold Dahl comes back to shore with his wounded kid and his dead dog, he goes to tell his partner, the partner who owned the boat with him, the guy named Fred Chrisman. Now, Chrisman, according to Chrisman, from that point drives down to the harbor and sees another UFO himself. So he's considered the second witness of the Maury Island UFO event, although he was not really on the boat for the first instance, and who knows, maybe he insinuated himself into the story. One way or another, they started to tell their story around. One thing about Chrisman is he was a regular contributor to the pulp science fiction magazines at that time. In fact, his first appearance in history is in a magazine called Harper's Weekly, where they're doing a report on a very early science fiction convention. And they do a brief interview with this guy, Fred Chrisman, who had written letters to Amazing Stories, which is one of several pulp magazines published by this guy named Ray Palmer, giving a story of the Shaver Mystery. The Shaver Mystery was something that Palmer put in all of his pulp magazines about this underground group of creatures who, by description, seem very much like the Greys from the Roswell UFO, but they're called the Dayros, and there's this underground civilization. And according to Chrisman, he fought them in Burma during the war, and he describes how he was shot by one of their weird alien space weapons that had drilled a hole in his arm. Very, very descriptive of like a laser energy weapon. You know, this is before lasers were even invented. So Chrisman was already known for that. And when Palmer got this story, whether he got the story from Chrisman or Dahl, we don't know, he posted this reward for more information. He actually hired Kenneth Arnold himself. He paid Kenneth Arnold $200 to go out there and talk to Dahl and Chrisman about the UFO event. So that's, you know, and this was, of course, after Arnold had his own. That's why he contacted Arnold, because Arnold had then become famous for his UFO sighting. So Arnold did that. You know, he went out there, he checked out their story, looked around, they gave him samples of the slag. There's this story about how, actually it comes back into the story later, but they assembled some of the slag and they put it in a Kellogg's cornflakes box. So Arnold does this. They actually published a book called The Coming of the Saucers, where that whole meeting is talked about. And he doesn't know what to make of the story. So he contacts the Air Force, which had just actually been created at that time. And he said, why don't you send some investigators out? I don't know what to do with this stuff. And that's what they do. They send out 2 investigators, Lieutenants Brown and Davidson. And there are all these stories, you know, if you want to get into weird, paranoid conspiracy stories about the Winthrop Hotel, which is where Arnold stayed and where Davidson and Brown stayed. And in fact, the Winthrop is still there in Tacoma. I've been there, and I believe that somebody should make an effort to get a plaque put there. But somehow, when Arnold came to town, there was already a reservation for him, even though every hotel, and because of something going on in the city there, every hotel was booked, but he had a reservation. He saw all kinds of evidence that there were bugs in his room, very kind of spooky atmosphere that these people showed up with. But anyway, Davidson and Brown come, and they talk to Dahl and Chrisman, and Chrisman gives them a Kellogg's Cornflakes box full of the slag, and they load it up on their plane, and they're going to take it back to Wright-Patterson for further investigation. Then on the way to Wright-Pat, their airplane crashes, and they die. And that's the end of the trail for that slag. So there you have, very weird circumstances. With, one of the first UFO events, Chrisman involved, sabotage and, assassination, all a part of it. Because after that, Chrisman disappears. He doesn't reappear into the scene until, 1963. One of the ideas behind that is that, as covert operatives, right, you do a successful job like that, you get your choice assignments, And then, Chrisman has the whole background of being with the OSS, So one of the theories is that because he did the job on Davidson and Brown, that he was given the job to do on JFK.
So Dahl and Chrisman are in Dallas in 63, as is Lee Harvey Oswald. But Oswald had also spent some significant time in 63 back in his hometown of New Orleans. Now this is really the scene that becomes Oliver Stone's JFK. While Oswald is in New Orleans, he associates himself with characters such as Clay Shaw, Guy Bannister, David Ferry.
Guy Bannister was in the Pacific Northwest at the time of the Maury Island incident. He was an FBI agent that some people brought to him a 30-inch disc. And there was this whole flying saucer story that appeared in the newspapers about this little 30-inch disc that he'd recovered. But he was an operative in the Pacific Northwest at the same time that Jim Garrison was working up there. He knew Jim Garrison all during the time of the Maury Island case. and there he is in New Orleans also in 1963. He is, I'm sure your listeners know about how Trump was accusing Cruz's father of being with Lee Harvey Oswald in New Orleans. The point that he missed there is that if that was true, and it may or may not be true, but if it was, that both of those guys were actually, instead they're passing out Fair Play for Cuba pamphlets, right? They're supposedly working for Castro, trying to get some sympathy for him. But what in fact they're doing is we know that those handouts were printed and found in Guy Bannister's office on Camp Street, New Orleans. So what that was an attempt by the FBI to infiltrate the pro-Castro group. Those guys were doing their patriotic duty, actually risking their lives, trying to infiltrate the pro-Castro group. Or Oswald was being set up to make it look like he was pro-Castro. Yeah. So that's the bridge. Guy Bannister is in both of those places too. It's not one of those weird coincidences.
And what about Clay Shaw?
Garrison always said that Clay Shaw was just a toehold. And he wasn't able to make his case, but when they pulled all the jurists afterwards, they all said that they thought Clay Shaw was involved one way or another, but that Garrison just simply didn't make the case. It's also been demonstrated by some historical researchers that Clay Shaw had a role in transitioning the Nazis, Werner von Braun and Walter Dornberger and all those guys that they were slave masters of Nordhausen in Germany, and after the war we took them over and they built our space program, and Clay Shaw apparently had some role in that as well. So conspiracy investigators are more just going down that road than, whatever role he also played in the JFK assassination.
There was a theory that Oswald had at some point been under some form of mind control using something inserted into him during a minor operation in Minsk. I'm assuming under the watchful eye of the comrades in the KGB. What's the theory behind that?
Well, okay, this we have to credit this to the original author of a book called "Were We Controlled?" It was by a guy who used the pseudonym Lincoln Lawrence, whose real name was Art Ford, I believe. And the idea was that Oswald was part of a program called RHIC and EDOM, Radio Hypnotic Intracerebral Control and the Electronic Dissolution of Memory, which was actual mind control technology that was demonstrated on the front pages of the New York Times. There's a famous photograph of one of the scientists who developed this technique standing in front of a charging bull and pressing a transceiver and stopping the bull from charging. So according to this book, Where We Controlled, Oswald may have been part of that mind control program, which I've tried to make the point before that there was no demonstration that actually that technology can cause you to do something. What had happened with the bull and with Jose Delgado is that he stopped the bull. But that's still, that doesn't rule out the idea that it might have been used in the Kennedy assassination, because what do we know about Oswald? He didn't shoot anybody. Maybe this mind control device actually stopped him. So anyway, yeah, Flying Sam is a very important book. I get in trouble all the time because I go down these pathways. It's all very, not only complicated, but very weird. And, a lot of the JFK researchers, look down on me probably. But I'm into the sociology of it all. So I found this book, revived it, did a reprint of it, and an expanded edition with a long intro. It's called Mind Control, Oswald, and JFK, where I go into more detail about various aspects of this. One of which, actually, this came up recently. In fact, I just got back not so long ago from Los Angeles, where I did an interview on Marilyn Monroe's grave about this whole mind control business. There's something called the Spiriglio document, which is very hard to find, but you can find it in my book, in this book, Mind Control, Oswald, and JFK. Has the Spiriglio document, which talks about Marilyn Monroe telling a pillow talk with Bobby Kennedy, telling him that JFK took her to the desert to see the things from outer space. That's the quote. And it's very hard to find this. So since we're talking about weird theories of the JFK assassination, I made sure that it got into that book along with the mind control.
Well, in the same work, you tell the story of Tino DeAngelis. Who is he?
Oh my God! You're going to want to go down to salad oil theory?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay. Well, this is a subset. This is also in the book Were We Controlled by Lincoln Lawrence. And it argues that the JFK assassination was meant to affect the stock market, particularly the salad oil futures. And you know how short selling goes. You know how stock markets are manipulated. Yeah, and Tony DeAngelis was the guy who was profiting off of this salad oil swindle. And actually, come to think of it. This book, Mind Control, Oswald, and JFK, has probably the three weirdest theories there are about the Kennedy assassination: the salad oil swindle, the mind control thing, and the things from outer space. But in every case, there is documentation right out of the newspapers of all of these stories. It's supported by facts. That fit together. Yeah.
Very true. Now back to Dallas. Now, if Dahl is one of the three tramps, the three hobos, there are still two others. Now, we've heard names like Chauncey Holt and Charles Harrison and E. Howard Hunt, but who are the other two?
Well, Chrisman, of course. And the thing about Chrisman is that's what Garrison believed. And I'm a big fan of Jim Garrison. I believe that he was an honest guy and a hard worker, and also closer probably than any other JFK researcher to the actual facts, where the trail, although, I think his investigation ended in 1968, 5 years afterwards, but, the trail was as hot as it's going to be with one of the smartest guys available investigating it.
So do you have a belief on who the third hobo might be?
Well, I don't necessarily believe any of these things. I enjoy having the long list of people who it might be, but you know, this appears in another document that has been described as some called the Torbit document. They actually, they published the photographs, and although there's an alternate spelling, I think, for each of them, but they say straight up that it's Fred Krisman, Harold Dahl, and somebody else whose name I don't remember. But you know, the other guy's been variously described as E. Howard Hunt. Actually, Hunt, the Hunt tramp and the Krisman tramp. That tramp has been identified as Hunt and Krisman. I don't think it's Krisman, but I think there's plenty to believe that another one of the tramps is. So there, you know, so there, you know, just as there could be up to 9 shooters at that point. The only really way you can get, you know, if I had the absolute answer for you, believe me, I wouldn't hold it back. and even the government, of course, originally concluded, Warren Commission originally concluded that it was lone nut, and then the House Intelligence Committee investigation of the 70s said it was part of a conspiracy. So even the government's all over the place about what the answer is. So I would say if you want me to name those 3, I would think, you know, it's pretty likely that Krisman was the shooter. If Dahl was his partner, and there's plenty to suggest that Krisman actually worked with partners. Actually, that's how I got onto the trail of this, the JFK trail in the first place, was Krisman's partners. And so maybe the other one was Dahl, and then the other one was Sturgis. But I tell you one thing about I don't really buy a lot of these jailhouse confessions. You know, people, you know, prisoners who are spending their lives in jail. You know, like Harrelson. You know, what else have they got to lose? You know, get a little publicity for themselves. You know, have a little fun, and also, you know, hitmen like that are just hired guns anyway, right? So even if they pull the trigger, that doesn't get us any close to, you know, what was the power behind it.
Harold Dahl later in life recanted the Maury Island story. Why did he do that?
Oh, because he was he came into all kinds of misfortune. His wife fell ill. His business went bankrupt. You know, he got visited supposedly by men in black, right? And he was just harassed to death for telling the truth. So he finally just, you know, shut it down. He finally said, okay, I was lying, forget it, leave me alone. It's that simple.
Oh, I can imagine. Fear is very effective. Now, to take the story down the road even a little bit further, what is the Octopus?
Okay, well, to follow that thread, we have to go back again to Fred Krisman. Fred Krisman had a business partner, a guy named Marshall Riconosciuto. Krisman wrote his memoirs, you know. There's a book out there called The Murder in the City. By that time, he was going by the name John Gold. But Krisman talks about his radio career in the Pacific Northwest in this book, and his partner, Marshall Riconosciuto. And at one point in the book, he also talks about Marshall's son, Michael, coming to visit him. Michael Riconosciuto was his child genius, who later on became the informant to Danny Casolaro. And Danny Casolaro is the central figure of the book, The Octopus. And that's where I entered the scene. Casolaro was investigating a side conspiracy during the Reagan years called the Inflaw conspiracy, which was really the Iran-Contra, when he was found, found suicided in West Virginia. The main informant to his story, and his story would, of course, take up another radio show, but his main informant was this guy, Michael Riconosciuto, business partners to Fred Krisman. So it's sort of fascinating to see this kind of intergenerational connection in the spy community.
Well, as I told the audience earlier, we're going to do an entire episode on the Octopus in 2018. I just wanted to give them an idea of what's going to be coming in the new year. What's the origin of Trumppocalypse now?
Well, you know, like I think I explained, after many years, you know, once the Kennedy assassination got past the 50-year mark, it seemed to me, you know, that it wasn't being pushed forward any further. And I did what I call semi-retired from my work as a a conspiracy writer or an activist or whatever. Just fell back low because I was getting old, getting health problems myself. And so I stopped writing for a while. But then Trump comes along and it hits a lot of my favorite themes. And, I needed money. So I wrote the Trump book.
That's a very honest answer. Thank you for that. Now, but the idea behind Trumppocalypse now is that Trump used conspiracy as a means by which to propel him into office. Now, people would think, well, conspiracy is very unpopular in mainstream political circles, but he had somehow managed to grasp onto it and use it for his advantage. Is that correct?
Well, yeah, I wouldn't want people to think that I advocate what Trump is saying. I don't believe Trump is any kind of a conspiracy theorist or any kind of a student in parapolitics. He's what I call a conspiracy celebrity, kind of cut out of the same mold as somebody like Jesse Ventura. Jesse Ventura, who, was the governor of a state whose Senator Paul Wellstone died in a mysterious plane crash shortly after the death of my own governor from the state of Missouri, Mel Carnahan, died in a plane crash. All these events leading up to the election of George Bush, very real, very still unplumbed depths of conspiratorial activity that Jesse Ventura didn't give squat about. There are these celebrities out there, and Donald Trump is one of them, and Jesse Ventura is one of them, who put conspiracy theory as part of their publicity package. And it helps to, give them an identity and something to push. But when it comes to real conspiracy like that, you don't see Ventura getting anywhere near it. What he does is he recycles all the Kennedy theories that have been developed and talked about in the research community. He's basically exploiting the research community for his own fame.
Now, while you don't advocate Trump's use of conspiracy, you are not also trying to say that what Trump was talking about wasn't real, correct?
No, not that they aren't real. It's just that I don't think he cares one way or another. It's just part of his publicity package. He had a show called The Conspiracy Theory, I think, or Conspiracy with Jesse Ventura. And one of the people on that show with him was Oliver Stone's son, who is now...
Sean Stone.
Yeah, who's now officially on the payroll of Russia Today. He's a Russian agent. But, you're not going to see Oliver Stone doing a movie about that. Actually, Oliver Stone is now an apologist for Putin. And this is the guy who gave us the JFK movie in 1992 that led to the Assassination Materials Review Act that opened up all of the files that Trump now, again, is trying to exploit for publicity. Only today did one of those files produce anything that I thought was interesting. But they had long been scheduled for release, and Trump comes along and he doesn't stop them from, being long scheduled for release, and all of a sudden Alex Jones is making him out to be the great hero of JFK assassination. It's absurd.
Which one of the files did you find interesting?
Oh, the one. Well, I just read about it before coming on talking to you tonight, and it's about Ruby actually being there with an agent, and apparently part of the reason why it's been classified all this time is one of these things about protecting the identity of the agent. They now named the agent, but the agent was there that Ruby actually took this agent to Dealey Plaza to, quote, watch the fireworks. So, yeah, they're only beginning to talk about this.
It will definitely be interesting to see how the researchers such as Dr. John Newman or Jefferson Morley, or in fact many of the others, how they deal with these files over the next, say, 5 to 10 years. See, here's the thing about conspiracy and truth-seeking in general. You can get some really useful information in the hours following the event in question. But after that, after the government and police spokesmen begin to control the media's narrative, you probably won't get anything useful until the independent researchers really begin writing much later. That time period, however, has decreased now that the Citizen Journalistic Corps can release information instantly. They can release information online, and they have. But history isn't instant. It's developed over time. So when someone asks me if Trump is the best president ever, or the worst president ever, or whatever qualifier they wish to use, I always say, I don't know. Ask me in 10 or 20 years, because the course has to be played out for history to be history. And I think the same can be said for conspiracy.
Yeah, I would agree with all that. But also, you can get some insight. I mean, you know what's happening with these files. I mean, most of them they're not going to be released until April. right? Trump signed off on that. So what happens in April? Taxes. And Trump doesn't want people paying attention to his taxes. So during that news cycle, he's guaranteed that we're going to be talking about the JFK files again.
That's true. You're right. So you're a person who's been in the alternative media and actually ran an alternative media magazine. I want to know what the upsides and what the downsides are of that, meaning, it seems like it's easy to get in, but it seems like it's hard to survive. What did you learn?
Well, it died. I'm from a period of zines. I don't know if you're old enough to remember this.
I love zines.
But, Steam Shovel Press, Flatland, Prevailing Winds, Dharma Combat. There used to be a zine called Fact Sheet 5 that would just list all of these zines, independently published little magazines that people distributed through the mail, or they had distributors or whatever. Before websites, before the internet became the way that people connected. And the way I did Steam Shovel, you had to find distributors, and then you have to go to your printer, pick up your copies, ship them off to the distributors, wait for them to send back the copies they didn't sell, and whatever money you could make. And it was a very cumbersome process. But as the technology came along, now you can. The thing is, you can reach many more people than you could that old-fashioned way. But there's no way you can sustain the effort because there's no way to make any money off of it. It's very hard to monetize this kind of a thing. And then Facebook comes along, and it creates a whole architecture where it's actually manipulating the conversation. I'm still dumbfounded by the like button. I get likes for things that I know people think are obnoxious, but they want to acknowledge that they've read it. But now they got little icons for a thumbs up, or different kinds of smile faces and all that stuff. But all of that is short of actually reading what's being said, thinking about it, and responding it with something thoughtful that you're writing. That's been undercut by social media.
So is it possible that we'll see a day when Kenn Thomas dives back into the alternative media?
Well, I have a Facebook. It's Kenn Thomas and then Steam Shovel Press in parentheses around it. And I conduct a daily discussion there. And I'm reaching enough people. I've got the maximum of people that I can get there. I'm coming close to the point where I can retire from my day job.
Now that's the American dream.
Yeah, and when that happens, I do. There are a lot of books. I would like to create a book, the textbook that tells the story of these various researchers. Starting with May and John Judge and Dave Emery. And Sherman Skolnick, and all these people I knew, Acharya S. that I knew or know. See, and that's the thing. The whole scene got, from my point of view, got really long in the tooth. I've lost a lot of people. John Judge being one of them. He was a dear friend of mine. Acharya S. who wrote the Christ Conspiracy, great love of my life. She passed away too. And and I'm getting old and sick too. So your perspective kind of changes. That's why I have to wait for retirement to do my next book. and I hope if I get that opportunity that I can tell the stories of these people, because we used to be called the marginals community back when we were still doing zines. I don't know what they call us now, but we are a small minority of activists, not cut out in the same mold as Black Lives Matter or these people that go out on the weekends with holding up ticket signs or whatever and trying to attract police bullets. But thinkers and analysts and writers that a small core of us trying to illuminate what's going on for the rest of the world. And all of my friends are, are brave heroes trying to do it, and I'd like to tell their stories in a book if I can get that far along in my retirement and everything else. Yeah.
So aside from your own works, what are the 3 conspiracy books that everyone should read?
Oh boy, okay. Got to do this fast. I can't think about this. Well, the one I just mentioned actually is very interesting. Acharya S. Wrote a book called The Christ Conspiracy. So if you're interested in religious culture and what are the political aspects of that, that is an essential book. You have to get Acharya S.'s book. Another book that's important. It's important to try to distinguish between what's a conspiracy and a coincidence. I would recommend people read, and this is people interested actually in the conspiracy of science. Read a book called The Case of the Midwife Toad by Arthur Kessler. I could go on as why that's interesting, but people think we did.
No, it's okay. Explain it to us. Why do you think that's an interesting book?
Well, it has to do with our understanding of genetics. You know, we here in the West, it's a random chance and an adaptation to environment. But in the history of genetics, the Soviet science is all based on something called the inheritance of acquired characteristics, which is, you know, if when a species adapts to an environment, that those changes are passed on to the next generation. You know, people who believe in Darwinian science don't believe that, but Soviet science is based on that. And the book that tells that story, interestingly enough, as that story is, has an appendix in which the guy who did the experimental work trying to demonstrate the inheritance of acquired characteristics talks about coincidences, what he calls seriality. He would, when he was commuting on the train to work, he would note how many people carried a certain umbrella or wore, a black hat or a red dress, and you try to categorize, and that's the big thing about conspiracy theories. Oswald, for instance, he served at Atsugi where the U-2s flew out of. When he defected to the Soviet Union, he gave them the information they needed to shoot down Gary Power's U-2. Before he got the job at the book depository, he worked for Jagger Stiles Stovall, the photographic firm that processed U-2 film. Is that just a bunch of coincidences? Or was he a spy connected to the U-2 program? And you see this time and again. You know, it's the big argument, you know, most of the time. Oh, well, it looks that way, but that was just a coincidence. So that the mental patterns that are formed by trying to understand that connection, seriality, which was later called synchronicity by Carl Jung, more known by that, and how that actually works in the conspiracy field. As a side note to that, you know, actually there's one of the appendixes in the Trumppocalypse book. And remember, the Trumppocalypse book, the subtitle is the Triumph of the Conspiracy Spectacle. And because of that, I think a lot of people think it's a pro-Trump book. But it's not that. It's the Triumph of the Spectacle. And in this appendix, I talk about an old television program called Route 66 that came out in 1962 that had an episode that opened up at the Fort Worth airport where JFK flew in the day it was shot. One of the main characters gets a job at the Trade Mart where JFK was going to go to give a lecture. And there's several other. Oh, at one point they talked to Earl Cabell on the phone, who helped redirect the motorcade route to put it into the sniper's nest. So all these details of the JFK assassination on broadcast television in 1962, the year before it happened. The hell is that about? And in fact, there are two more episodes of the same program. One of them has a Marilyn Monroe figure and it takes place in a town that's not quite called Kennedy Town, but something like that in there. And there's a number of coincidences there. And then there was one episode of 66 that was about an actual political assassination with a gun, very similar to what happened, that was never aired, has never been aired, because it was supposed to come out on the day that Kennedy was shot. Now, what are all these coincidences about? You know, Judge used to suggest to me that they work out these scenarios in Hollywood. You know, CIA agents are writing scripts for Hollywood that so they can work out how these things are done, and then they put it on television. It wasn't that one of the things about Chrisman was, Chrisman used to, in later life, Chrisman used to say that there was a television program called The Invaders. Do you remember The Invaders?
Yes, I do.
Yeah, and Chrisman used to say that was about him. You know, it was the story of this guy who was trying to get the story out about the alien invasion, and the government was trying to stop him. You know, and so people say this is just another crazy thing that that Chrisman said, but it was borne out later that Chrisman got a job at the Hanford nuclear reactor that was signed off on by Mark Felt. And Mark Felt is listed as script consultant for Quinn Martin, the people that produced The Invaders show. Mark Felt is now known in history as Deep Throat in the Watergate investigation. So, it's that patterning. That could all just be coincidence.
Yes, I mean, the links really are amazing. But what's bothered me for a long time is that, for example, the JFK experts don't want to bleed over into the UFO experts, and the UFO experts don't want to bleed over into the 9/11 experts, and the 9/11 experts don't want to bleed over into the Pearl Harbor experts, or you run the risk of not being considered an expert in the one category that you want to be considered by your peers as an expert in. But yet, all of these stories link.
Yeah, well, it is true that a lot of the JFK people are actually wealthy lawyers, and it's a hobby, and they're hobbyists, and it's all kind of what Leonard Cohen was called middle class and lame. That's all quite true. But I think the point that I'm trying to make in the Trumppocalypse now is that what is so nefarious about these connections to the Russians is that Putin conducts an assassination program. And I have a whole chapter of photographs of everybody, not everybody, but all of these, the political dissenters that Putin killed. Very much echoing what happened to our country in the 1960s. It's not just JFK who was shot, RFK, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, how a coincidence, there's a bunch of coincidences, or was that an assassination program? Is that how we want to run the world? It's not through democratic means, but actually killing our democratic leaders, and that's what Trump represents when he tries to ally with Russia. Where he does, he's going to give him the benefit of the doubt. He's just too stupid to figure that out. Otherwise, he's kind of conspiring with them. And I should say, then the point. Now it sounds like I'm jumping on Trump, and you're going to get a lot of Trump supporters that are going to jump on you. But let me mention another thing about Trumppocalypse now is that back in the 90s. I wrote an article for the Washington Post called Clinton-Era Conspiracies, in which I outlined what I saw as the coming conspiracies. And the Washington Post published this thing. And then Hillary Clinton came out with this report called the Commercial Stream of Conspiracy Commerce. I forget its exact title. And the first thing in the report was this article that I'd written for the Washington Post. The theory was that phony stories get planted in the European press, and then they blow back to the American press, and as if this is true, and that's how conspiracy theories form. It's a stupid theory because I was reading for the Washington Post with no European press. Washington. But the point is that it was, if you want to categorize it as a pro or con thing, it was an anti-Clinton thing. So I'm not taking a Clinton side over a Trump side. I'm not into that partisan debate. I think anybody who's running for office is part of, the one percenters. And we certainly do live in an unjust world when so much of the world's wealth is collected right up there in the top. And this false dialogue, this dumb show between the left and the right, really distracts us because, it's not about who we support for president. We're not separated by that. What separates people is class. And we've got this ultra super class, and you cannot say anything that is worse than what they really are. They're liars, they're cheaters, they cheat on each other, they steal wealth from everybody else. And as free Americans, we got to stand against it.
Absolutely, and we did a really good episode on just that when we talked to Don Jeffries about his book, Survival of the Richest, and he has it pegged. But speaking of the 1%, the 1% seems to be the focus of this Pizzagate story. What do you think about the Pizzagate story?
I wouldn't put it past them. I haven't actually investigated Pizzagate, but that there are secret elite pedophile rings. It seems obviously clear that that's true. Yeah. So,
Well, one of the problems that I've had with it is not so much that it occurs. We know that. The problem I have with it right now is the reaction to it, because it seems like if it's a politician, if it's a rock star, if it's a movie star, people tend to want to go lighter or not believe it at all until there's hard evidence. But if it's a cab driver, if it's a school teacher, if it's a Catholic priest, if it's someone in your hometown who works in a store, people tend to want to believe it automatically and nail that person to the cross and shun them publicly. I don't get this.
Well, they're high profile, too. A taxi cab driver or a pastor, even if you try to call them out on what they're doing, how would anybody else know? Because those people aren't famous. There's that. But I think secretly we have such contempt for the upper class that it kind of guides everything. I mean, Trump came to power through the culture of ridicule, right? I mean, every step of the way, this big clown, he was being torn apart every night by all the talk show hosts and by every newspaper, and he laughed all. And again, it's always true. No matter how bad his behavior, people love it. They love it. It's a demonstration, not of actual love, but of contempt. That we have a clown show going on instead of real government. We have a fool instead of somebody that we can respect. What Malcolm Muggeridge said about Lenny Bruce. They said this about Lenny Bruce too. That you listen to Lenny Bruce's stuff now. It's like tame compared to anything you're going to see today. But Malcolm Muggeridge said it was like a sore tooth. That you rub your tongue around, it's painful, but you do it, and I think that's by and large the attitude that we get from the general public.
Let's talk about popular conspiracy again, and I want to ask you about the work of Jim Marrs. He's probably the most popular conspiracy writer that we've seen in our lifetime, in a sense that he sold the most books. What did you think of the work of Jim Marrs?
Jim Marrs was a dear friend of mine, and yeah, in fact, I credit him for pushing me over the top in JFK studies. I mean, at one point, JFK was like any other conspiracy topic. I liked studying it, but there was really nothing special about it. But I read Crossfire, which is half of what Oliver Stone based the JFK movie on, and that put me over the top. That solidified me. And in fact, you can find, there's a great conversation between me and Jim online. If you go to YouTube and you type in Jim Marrs and Kenn Thomas, you should be able to find it. He went down some weird paths. He was kind of a populist guy and a good old boy. And he wrote books on the alien agenda, and he was wrong on some things. We had one big disagreement about there's this thing about JFK issued this money that doesn't have Federal Reserve on it. So that means he was secretly trying to undercut the Federal Reserve. But actually those dollars were created to recover the silver in quarters, which the actual metal in the quarters was worth more than the quarter itself. So they issued this executive order 1110 or something like that, where they issued these dollars to buy back the silver. And I remember this when I was a kid. I got in trouble. We found a bunch of silver quarters in a sock, and we spent them, and we got in real big trouble with the adults because of this. And it had nothing to do with secretly trying to undercut the Federal Reserve. But Jim didn't believe that. I mean, I'm pretty certain that I'm right on this one. But Jim and I disagreed on that. But we were good friends. He, in places where we lectured together, I'm constantly, I'm like the absent-minded professor, and he's giving me his laser pointer, and he's always, helping me with my notes and stuff. And I was very sad to hear of his passing. He was also good friends with my dear friend Victoria, and Marrs are good buddies too.
I have heard the Federal Reserve theory, and the loss of Jim Marrs is just gigantic. Now, speaking of JFK again, there was also the theory that he was killed because he was going to release the real information on Roswell. Is there any evidence behind this whatsoever?
Well, that's like a Bill Cooper theory, I'm actually glad people believe that, and I hope that it leads them to trying to take a look at the broader truth about this, and which is, of course, the last speech that JFK was going to give was going to be on the TFX tactical fighter, which later became the F-111, a fighter jet that we eventually sold to Australia. We created a whole funding corridor, actually, to sell this to Australia. Now, if you read Seymour Hersh, you'll find out more about how, and this is what Jim Garrison believes, too, that Jim Garrison believed that Fred Crisman shot JFK at the behest of Boeing, that he was working for Boeing, because Boeing lost the contract to the TFX fighter. You can find out more about this in Seymour Hersh's book, The Dark Side of Camelot. And that corridor led to the development of Pine Gap, which are these huge radome structures all over Australia, all part of that F-111 deal, which is the Area 51 of Australia. So that should turn your attention back to Area 51, which the U-2s flew out of, where Lee Harvey Oswald worked in Japan, where the U-2s flew out of. Lee Harvey Oswald sold Gary Powers down the river by giving the Soviets U-2 information. U-2, Area 51, the picture of the military, the dark nightmare, the military-industrial complex, comes out through that line of thinking. So it's not, he was shot because of Roswell, but Roswell is kind of a science fiction nightmare. But it's nothing. It's like a cartoon compared to the real reality of the military-industrial complex, which is who killed Kennedy.
Right, and I would absolutely agree with that. So if there's anyone out there who would like to know more about you or your work, where can they go?
Okay, well, primarily through Facebook, although, I'm kind of at the limit. I don't know how many people they let you sign up, but I'm at like 5,000 now. But that would be Kenn Thomas. There are 2 Kenn Thomases. There's my personal page. I don't accept anything on that. But the one that has Steam Shuffle Press in parentheses around it, so you can get on. You can join the discussion there. You can get the book through Amazon. Trumppocalypse Now there. You can find a list, a bibliography of my stuff at Wikipedia. Just type in Kenn Thomas. And that'll give you the titles if you want to track them down.
This has been Kenn Thomas, writer, conspiracy theorist, and alternative mastermind. Thank you very much. Great job tonight, Ken.
Well, I'm flattered that you say that, and so it was a nice talk, and hopefully we'll do it again sometime soon.
We absolutely will. 2018 should be a great year. I'm S.T. Patrick. This is the Midnight Rider News Show. We'll be right back. On August 31st, 1997, the world lost Diana, the Princess of Wales, in a tragic car accident in a Paris tunnel. The accident was felt worldwide, but maybe it wasn't an accident at all.
My name is Alan Power. I'm the author of The Princess Diana Conspiracy. And I was talking about, if you want to know how MI6 and the royal family were involved in the rather tragic crash that killed Diana, Princess of Wales, this is episode 21 of the Midnight Rider's News Show.
I want to thank Kenn Thomas for being on the show tonight. Please do yourself a favor and look up his work. You will love his work, I promise you that. Now, this has been the 7th and final show of our first annual JFK month. Thank you. We hope this will be an annual event. And while JFK was my starting point in this world, and while the JFK assassination still remains my favorite topic, we're going to try to take a month to 6 weeks off of JFK material so we can bring you some more diverse topics. In the next month, we're going to get into the prison abolition movement. Brian Lloyd will join us again to update his research into what happened in Vegas, and we'll get into UFOs. Now, I'm efforting a couple of amazing guests to talk about religion, since it is Christmas month, and believe me, these would be blockbuster guests, so fingers crossed, prayers said, and we'll see how it goes. To all of you who so kindly download these episodes within days of their release, thank you. For all of you who have then downloaded the entire archive, thank you. Our first annual JFK month was a success because of our guests and mostly because of you. From the other side of the mountain, on the best side of midnight, I wish you peace.
The Midnight Rider News Show with S.T. Patrick is a production of MidnightRiderNews.com. Copyright belongs to S.T. Patrick and all rights reserved. You can email us at midnightridernews@gmail.com And be sure to visit MidnightRiderNews.com for the best in alternative historical analysis. This is Leanne saying thank you for listening, have a great night, and always remember, when life throws you lemons, throw them back into man chocolate.